Welcome to Escoffier Online. This is Chef Thomas here at 9:30 with Home Gardening. I have a special guest here, and I'll let her introduce herself to you.
Hi, my name is Brenda Dolfers, and I am a Master Gardener Coordinator in McHenry County, Illinois, and I work for the University of Illinois Extension.
Well, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you, and we have so many cool things here. I've been gardening for so long, and I'm actually happy that I have a professional here to actually tell me what to do. So just like in culinary arts, where we have a lot of techniques and skills we have to apply to make our knife skills look good or our chicken come out right, this is very similar in gardening. So Brenda, tell me a little bit, how can we, how is the process for a home gardener, like a chef who wants to maybe get a couple herbs in or maybe tomatoes? I think we're about at the right time now, right?
Absolutely. This is a perfect time. We have been through such a hard winter that this is the first week actually that I've seen anything that resembles wanting to grow. Gardening is kind of a gateway drug. A lot of gardeners turn into cooks.
Oh.
Because they have this great produce and they need to know what to do with it. So
you're going to send them to our program then?
I find most master gardeners are phenomenal chefs. They are really into preserving and canning and just showing off the stuff that they grow in the best possible way. So if you as a chef are going to work your way backwards, that works out too. What you need to do is figure out what it is that you want to grow. Chef Thomas talked about growing herbs. He talked about growing vegetables. Either one is a choice, but my advice for a beginner is to start small because you want to be successful at what you're doing. You want to be able to work your way through an entire season with some awesome results rather than giving up halfway through because you've overwhelmed yourself. So starting with the things that you want to grow, and I see stuff here on your table that you've picked out. Mm-hmm. What do you have here?
Well, I usually grow a couple of herbs. So I bought this mix here. I think there's some cilantro, some oregano, some chives, and basil, and I also got thyme. So where would you recommend that to grow?
Okay. Well, first, the second step after figuring out what you want to grow is to figure out where you're going to grow it.
Okay.
If you live in an apartment, you can still grow things. If you live in a house with a big yard, you can still grow things. You just need a couple of minimum requirements. First of all, 8 hours of full sun during the day is optimum. Herbs and some of the leafy greens, your lettuces and spinach and things can take a little bit less, but 8 hours of full sun is perfect. And if you have a water source, that would be the second most important thing. You don't want to have to be hauling buckets of water in July to the back 40 because that's where the sun is. That's the reason I say apartment growing is perfect because a lot of people have balconies that are in full sun. Containers work great in that kind of a situation. Containers can be moved back and forth.
Now, I picked up something that's kind of cutesy. I don't know, now I'm giving my main card away again. I found these just in a grocery store yesterday. So this would be something we can probably use for herbs or something very simple.
Honestly, you can use anything for a container as long as it has drainage holes. I do see that one has drainage holes, so that's perfect. So you can get real cutesy and actually plant things in an old rubber boot if it's got holes in it. And it can drain.
You give me some interesting ideas there with the rubber boots. Okay, so we have the herbs covered. Let's go to a little bit more. So I consider this kind of a little bit easy because this for me that even grows in my house. So let's go to maybe something more complicated. I don't know if I even should say that. So of my selection here, I would say probably the tomatoes are something very common for the chefs to grow, and these tomatoes actually don't ever make it into my house because my daughter picks them right off the vine and eats them. They're like warm and she loves them.
Cherry tomatoes are awesome for that.
So maybe talk a little bit about the most common things like the tomatoes, the peppers, zucchinis. I know a lot of chefs would grow too. Is this now the next step? Where would we grow those, or what do we have to do?
Okay.
Oh, do we have a question?
Question. I thought cilantro grew in cooler weather. So I guess the question is, what's the optimal weather to grow cilantro?
We just got a question about what is the optimum weather for cilantro to grow. So Brenda, what would you safe for that particular student?
There are cool season vegetables and herbs, but I would just consider cilantro as being one of the leafy types. And it's true, in high heat, things like lettuce, things like spinach, and the leafier greens will bolt, which means that they'll go to flower and seed really quickly in hot weather. That tends to make them bitter. So there are things that need to be planted out early in the spring, and then again in late summer, so that you can have a fall crop. There's, and that's another reason why I say the leafy greens, like your lettuces and spinach, will actually take more shade, because it also keeps them from being in such high temperatures. But you also have your warm season vegetables that really, really like it hot. Tomatoes are a prime example. Tomatoes cannot stand being cold. If you were to take a tomato transplant and plant it outside right now, it would just sit there and look at you. It would actually turn purple. The leaves would take on a purple cast because it just doesn't deal well with the cold. So those are one of the things that we want to plant out well after a frost date. So you mentioned at one point in time zones,
Yes.
planting zones.
Because we have students all over the place. So.
Absolutely. The United States is such a large country that it's actually been divided into zones. Here in northern Illinois, we're in zone 5. If you go farther north, the numbers get lower, and if you go south, the numbers get higher. Basically, the way I remember it is the higher the zone, the zone number, the more things you can grow in that zone. Those are the 10s are your Floridas, the 1s are your northern Canadas. In Europe, I understand that they don't have zones. I made that mistake one time when I was traveling to London. I called over there to the Royal Botanic Garden to ask what growing zone that they were in.
They didn't know.
They had no clue what I was asking. And yeah, it didn't occur to me.
I can see that. I'm from there. So.
That's okay. That's okay. But the growing zone. Oh, and we have another. Let me finish on the growing zones real quick. The growing zone basically is based on when your last frost date and your earliest freeze date is. Right here in northern Illinois, we consider our last frost date to be right around Mother's Day, mid-May. So something like peas, you can actually plant out right now in the garden, and they'll do just fine. They'll take a light frost. They'll be okay. Like I said, you put that tomato out there, and he's just going to turn purple and look at you.
We have another question of a student there.
How do you trim the herbs to use them? Do you just cut at the plant, or does it hurt it?
The question was where to cut the herbs. I would assume when you start harvesting. Brenda, do you want to take that one? Seems like I only know how to cook. I don't know.
Well, no, but you say you have herbs at home, and you even actually bring them in the winter, which is perfect.
I do cut them usually on the top, because I heard that this is pretty much the spot where the herbs are the best. Not so far down on the stem. Obviously, with chives, you would probably cut them fairly close to the ground, maybe an inch or so.
Yeah, actually, chives you can cut. In fact, after they're done blooming, and you can even use the chive blossoms when you're cooking in salads and things like that. It's recommended, if you'd like to get a second bloom out of them, to cut them down 2 or 3 inches, above ground, and then they'll come back again another blossom time for the season, which is great. But herbs, yes, actually, herbs would prefer that you pinch them back, because that's going to create a larger and bushier plant. So instead of getting a single stalk that just kind of, grows up and then flops over, by pinching the tops off, you're forcing it to branch out at the sides, and you'll get a much fuller, much nicer looking plant, and obviously more tips to be able to pinch off.
Perfect. Well, so now we have a couple of vegetables. I actually have a particular question, because I always had problems with these, and these are the carrots. So I heard different stories about carrots, to grow them like in sand versus in soil, because they would grow actually further and larger, versus they get like really knotty. Is this just another thing I just heard, or is this?
No, actually you're right. Root crops obviously will have a much easier time growing and expanding into a sandy kind of a soil, as opposed to clay, obviously. The only problem with sandy soils is that they don't hold much water, and they don't hold much fertility either. So, there has to be kind of a happy balance. I would not suggest adding sand to most soil, at least in this area. We have really bad clay soils, and what happens when you put clay and sand together? You get really nice concrete.
Oh,
So, so we don't want to do that.
Sense now why my carrots don't come out.
Right, right.
They come like out like little knobs.
Right.
That's
So,
what it is.
so actually, a nice, light, fluffy, composted soil would work much better than just growing in straight sand.
Now, Brenda, there's also something about seeding directly into the soil and then purchasing a pre-grown plant. I brought a
Right.
couple things in here for those who have already planted. There's different techniques on generating your own pots. We have, I'm not even quite sure that those are like hockey pucks almost. And then we also have these seed pots here.
Which is new. I've not seen that one before.
Yeah, this looks interesting.
That's kind of cute. Yeah. Basically what we're doing with any of these, and this is the larger one here, so I can show you that. What these basically are, you're going to put your soil in here. Notice they have the little drainage holes in the bottom, and then it's going to fit actually into this base. So you'll have your soil inside here. You're going to plant a seed inside each one of these. And then this little guy is going to go over the top just to create and hold a little bit more moisture and a little bit more heat while they're germinating. Once that little plant has come up and you see the two actual true leaves, you're probably going to want to remove this at least for part of the day, because if it's too moist and wet in there, you'll get rot. It's called damping off, but they'll just
And I
keel
think
over.
we have a picture about how this looks when you go from seed to plant. It's kind of like a little graphic which we pulled up here. So obviously this would be only the first real step where the plant is maybe having 2 or 3 leaves, so it's safe to actually put out in the ground, correct? Or are we
Yes.
looking for a height, or what are we looking for directly?
Yes. Again, you're looking for your temperatures.
Okay.
This one is just exactly the same, except these little hockey pucks in here are actually just compressed soil. And the compressed soil, when you get it wet, will expand, and it'll pop up about this high. You can see it's got kind of a little divot in the middle where you're going to put your seed, and then it works exactly the same way. This will kind of hold its shape.
Oh, I see. So it actually
And then you
expands
can,
with
and
the
then
soil,
and then
huh?
this you can plant directly in the ground. Just take that whole little plug out. This one has the little cover on it too, so you're going to do the same mini greenhouse going on there. And then you're going to plant your seed in there, and then when it's ready to be planted out, then that's what you'll do. This other one that you brought in, which like I said is really kind of cute, and now that I've looked at the label, and this one actually is meant to be planted directly into the ground. This actually has the seed in it.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a zucchini. This one has a zucchini seed in there. They're trying to make this really easy for you. All you're going to do is peel that label off and stick it right into the soil. And it's got the soil in, it's got, seed starting soil in here. And then this is, this outside will decompose.
Yeah, so it grows right the roots from. I think
Right.
we had another question here.
Actually, I have several questions.
Ooh.
3. I think they're referring to herbs. Are the tender leaves more flavorful than the older leaves? I'll let you answer that one.
Oh, are the tender leaves, are the younger leaves more tender than the older leaves in herbs? I would assume, yeah. I mean, as younger the leaves you plug, as better they are. I would assume, right, or not?
I think so
The
on
herbs.
on the herbs and things. However, if you're talking about your leafy vegetables, your spinach and your chards and your lettuce and things like that, you actually want to harvest from the outside in. Those are the older leaves. Those are the larger ones. Granted, you don't want them to be too large to harvest because they will get a little bit bitter. But you want to harvest from the outside in, or otherwise you're going to kill the crown of your plant if you start from the middle and work your way out.
Perfect. Okay.
Next question.
So do you germinate inside or outside?
Germination depends strictly on temperature. Most seeds will germinate at the 70 to 75 degree mark. When I was a kid, I remember the thing was to take these little seed trays that we have here and put them on top of the refrigerator because the motor in the refrigerator would get warm, and that would be just the right temperature. You have now you can buy mats that will
Heat it up.
that will heat it up. They're electric. You plug them in, and so it's really not a function of air temperature with germination. It's strictly soil temperature that we're dealing with.
And probably the lids help when you germinate in boxes like that. I'm pretty sure to keep it a little bit more
Right.
safe.
Keep the warmth in.
Yeah. I remember one year I was germinating in those, and then I had frost in there, and I realized that I killed all my plants because they were sitting on the window, and we had one of these nice drafty evenings.
Okay.
And there was like ice crystals on top. So.
Right. Now that kind of brings me to another point. I would hate for somebody to go out and buy one of these little kits and set it up on the windowsill, because while that's really cool for teaching little kids all about germination, let's face it, once that lima bean pops, if you remember what happened to it when you were a kid in school, it got really tall and really tall and then eventually it just kind of flopped over, and then one day it wasn't
Died.
there when you came home from school, and mom said, oh, whatever she did with it. When you're starting plants from seed, you need to have a light source. And light source can just be a regular, incandescent bulb, whatever. It just needs to be really tight to the top of the plant, 4 to 5 inches away from the top of a plant. That keeps it from getting long and spindly. Let's face it, these guys are reaching for the sun at this point, and this time of year, that sun's pretty still far away. So if we can bring that light down on top of them, it'll keep them shorter, it'll make the stems a lot stronger, and it'll keep that plant much, much happier until it's time to plant it out. So that brings us all the way back then to why would you do seed versus why would you do a starter plant? So that's one reason. Do you have the place and do you have the equipment to start from seed? That's a key. Obviously, the benefits of starting from seed is that you get to pick your variety. So I see Chef Thomas has these really adorable little yellow tomatoes and these cherry tomatoes. There are so many varieties, hundreds and hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, and if you have a favorite, obviously that's the one that you want to work with. But there are, perfectly acceptable varieties that you can get at the nursery, and you don't have to worry about hanging on to them and keeping them going until the time when you can plant them out into the garden.
Now, Brenda, there's something about nursery because I used to work for another college where actually the horticulture program actually produced, plants from seeds, and they would actually sell them much cheaper than you would get them at a gardening store or so forth. So
Absolutely.
that is something also. I don't know. Is the University of Illinois doing something like that too, where you plant or
There are some Master Gardener groups that do plant sales. We actually have one in conjunction with a garden walk that we do in July, which is pretty late for vegetables. Actually, this year we're focusing a lot on herbs. So at our July sale, we will actually have lots and lots of herbs to sell because those are some of the things that you can bring in and overwinter, which works out really well. But check your local newspapers, your local garden clubs. They always have plant sales in the spring, usually starting around Mother's Day. So this would be perfect to keep an eye out for those.
So we started this, today's Earth Day, so I think that this class was like perfect,
Absolutely.
like right in front of the start. So it seems like we can push our students to go out there and buy some seeds or buy some plants and start thinking about where you're going to put them and what you're going to be growing. Look at our recipes. That would be a good thing too when you know something is coming later up and you need tomatoes. Maybe you want to grow your own tomatoes. It might take a little bit, but it might be very interesting. Now, Brenda, tell us a little bit before we close out here about your Master Gardener and the program itself and how people can contact you or, in their state to connect with somebody who really knows how to grow.
Absolutely.
So they don't call me.
or just me. Actually, every Master Gardener program is part of the extension program. Extension programs are part of land-grant universities. So if you're in the United States and you have a land-grant university, which every state does, there is a Master Gardener program near you. All you need to go is to your University of whatever state extension, click on that site, and then find out where your local extension office is, and they'll have a Master Gardener program. Actually, it is an international program also. We do have an international Master Gardener conference every couple of years, which is really cool. They just started one in Korea this year,
wow.
a Master Gardener program. So we're out there. University of Illinois is celebrating their 100th anniversary as an extension program. So definitely we're out there, and you can find us. Just Google extension in your state, and we'll be there for you.
Well, Brenda, thank you so much for coming. Let's check, do we have any more questions? Students, please feel free to email me with any questions that were not answered yet. And Brenda, thank you so much for coming out. It was a pleasure, and happy Earth Day.
Yeah, thanks.